It's 8:01, so let's get rolling. Let me adjust this real quick. Alrighty. So, hi everyone. I hope you had a great Monday. Before we get started, I have a few things I just want to mention really quickly. First, I want to ask a favor from all of you. I have 2 new classes starting this month. The first is another run of the 8-week Extreme Fat Loss course. And the second is a new course, which is Massive Fat Loss. That one's a little bit different than Extreme Fat Loss. It's not really habit-based. It's solely low-carb and barbell-based training specifically. So if you could the word, and if you refer anyone you know that might be interested, that'd be great. I would really appreciate it. If you do know someone, but they think they might like to talk to me first, I'd be more than happy to talk to them too. So if you could, kind of get the word out, and if you think of anyone that would benefit from anything, the classes that I have to offer, that would be great. All right, so based on the questions that have been submitted so far, the theme for this Hangout is apparently low carb. I don't know what I started, but there's lots of low carb stuff in this Hangout. So since that's come up, a few people have recently switched to low carb plans, and I kind of want to elaborate on the idea behind that. I think that low carb diets are great as a short-term solution, and I don't think that carbs are evil, and I hope that anyone that's switching doesn't get into that mentality of that carbs are bad, blah, 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 they're evil, you should eliminate them forever, they'll kill you, and none of that stuff. In this particular context, they help to kind of reprogram your association with food as a reward, because in order to adhere to a low-carb diet, you really have to cut out food that is hyper-palatable. What that means is that the food is likely a combination of fat, carbs, and salt, so that when you eat it, you don't feel full at all. In fact, you may get hungrier, you crave it, and it lights up the reward center of your brain like a Christmas tree. This makes it difficult to stick to normal portions and stick to your calorie goals, because for many people, these are binge triggers. But it's a little bit different than a binge trigger, because the food industry knows that the certain combination of fat, salt, and carbs in a certain proportion do that, and it causes people to overconsume, which results in more sales for them. So as you know, the bottom line is I'm a big fan of fitting in foods that you love and making it work with your goals rather than trying to fight against it. However, sometimes I think it does pay off to be a little bit strict temporarily. So this has a few side effects. Other than the one I've already mentioned, is that you're kind of getting rid of the hyperpalatable foods temporarily, is that the primary side effect is it reprograms your taste buds a little bit. I know that after I've done low carb, things that I haven't eaten before or thought didn't taste good taste better now, and things that I would have eaten before that were basically sugary crap didn't taste as good as I thought they did before. Another side effect is that by eliminating an entire food group, if you have any particular issues with a certain food like an intolerance, it's likely to be revealed as you'll start to just feel better overall. The other thing that's positive is that you're also very likely to drop a decent amount of water weight as soon as you start, and this helps to reestablish you in a positive feedback loop. Positive feedback loop when it comes to weight loss is that if you lose weight, that gives you some forward momentum, and that momentum carries you forward. But it is water weight. Now, I don't expect anyone that's asked to do the low-carb plan to do it for a long time unless they want to do so. I'd ask that when you're ready to transition off of it, you talk to me ahead of time. All that water weight you might lose in the first week or two, as soon as you go back to eating carbs at what a regular amount is for your plans, that water weight's going to come right back on, and it could come back on in a single day. And that can be incredibly demoralizing. I've been there myself. I've done, without a coach, got off of low carb, and it's an awful feeling to step on the scale and see that, hey, I just gained 10 pounds in 2 days. What the hell? But having someone else to kind of be objective about that and let you know that, this is going to happen. You should be prepared for it. Don't let the scale dictate how you're feeling. It's normal. All you're doing is storing the carbs in water you weren't eating before. Now you're storing them. So it's going to happen. So let me know in advance, and we'll work on that together, and we'll come up with a plan just so that you're aware and prepared for it. So I think the best way to do that transition is to do something like slow carb. Some of you are doing something similar already. You're kind of eliminating some more processed carbs and going to a slow carb approach where you have your carbs from plant sources, potatoes, beans, fruit, things like that, where it's your carb sources are things that grow in the ground or they're single ingredients for the most part. When you do that, I'd like you to ask to re-add them one at a time. So that way you can kind of see how you react to a specific food. So let's just say you're eating a low carb and then you want to switch to a carb, back off on the fats and up the carbs a little bit. Start with like potatoes or sweet potatoes and don't add anything else but just that one food. And if you feel great, pick something else. And that way you can kind of see how you react to different foods. I've done this myself multiple times in different forms, and it's really helpful to kind of see how I react to different foods. If you noticed on my Fitness Pal, that's a tough one. I eat the same foods over and over again for breakfast and lunch, and even for dinner most times, and snacks. And that's a result of me having experimented with my taste buds as well as how certain foods make me feel. So what I'm eating right now is the result of me figuring out which foods give me the most energy and make me feel the best, and then trying to get the majority of my calories from those foods. There is an endless variety out there, but I've kind of figured out what works for me both in cost and shopping and preparation time and going from there. So now if you were just adding them all back in at once, if you did happen to have a food that didn't agree with you, you'd never be able to differentiate which food actually caused that if you were just throwing them all back in at once overnight. So that's kind of why I prefer doing it slowly, one at a time. Okay, now on to the questions. The first question is from Danny, and Danny's wondering about stevia since it's a natural no-calorie sweetener, as Danny can't take any sweeteners with aspartame. The good news is Splenda does not have aspartame in it. It contains sucralose. So you may want to look and see if you can actually have Splenda or not, because it's definitely not aspartame based. Splenda is what I use. The most you don't want to be eating that. It does cause a reaction in your body. So at lower doses, this reaction in the body is positive because it's anti-inflammatory and it can help protect the kidneys, pancreas, liver, and brains. However, higher doses have been shown to negatively affect the reproductive system. Now, that was in rats. Unfortunately, there really aren't any human-based studies using stevia. So it's really difficult to say whether or not it's a good idea to use that as your primary sweetener. Now, both of these scenarios really depend on how much sweetener you're using. Using myself as, a baseline, I probably use 6 or 7 packets of Splenda a day, and that's it. So that's something to kind of be aware of. If you were going to use something on the order of like 20 or 30 stevia packets, probably too much. And at that point, I'm not sure that I would be wanting to use stevia. So to summarize, you could say that stevia is probably fine in small doses, but due to the fact that there are 0 human-based studies, it would be wrong to assume that it's harmless. There's simply not enough information to draw a conclusion. So at that point, the science says we don't know. It impairs reproduction in rats. So, all right. So on to the next question. Again from Danny. Danny read that low-carb diets reduce insulin levels in the body and wants to know if she should be concerned with lowered insulin levels. And if her levels are low, will her body stop producing healthy amounts of insulin? So to answer this, I want to first state that my answer is only going to apply to someone that's considered healthy. So anyone with a metabolic disorder such as diabetes, you'd have to check with your doctor because that's kind of beyond the scope of what I can answer. Anytime you have a metabolic disorder, the way the hormones in your body they work and the way they're affected, and the effect itself, the intensity of the effect is going to differ. And that's basically what a metabolic disorder does, is it kind of changes the way those hormones work. So this is kind of just a baseline, normal, average person when I'm stating the answer here. So with that said, what you read about low-carb diets and insulin levels is kind of only half the picture. Protein increases insulin levels as much, or if not more, than carbohydrates themselves. So for example, if you eat a piece of beef or fish, it can increase insulin in your body more than brown rice can. So the good news is, as long as you're eating sufficient protein, this isn't something you have to worry about. This works because insulin is not the fat storage hormone. It's actually the nutrient shuttling hormone. So what that means is, in the case of muscles, insulin is what puts amino acids, or the protein you eat, into your muscles. So in the case of other cells, without insulin, you cannot push nutrients into their cells. So the only way you'd have low insulin as a result of a low-carb diet is if it was also a low-protein diet. So that would be high-fat, low-carb, low-protein. In that case, you'd effectively be starving yourself, despite that there would be calories coming into your body, which I wouldn't recommend. This is actually a really complex topic, and this kind of starts to dive into like a biochemistry textbook at this point. So, hormones like insulin and all that is based on, how much fat you currently have. And there's things like insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance. And as your body fat changes up or down, those levels of insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity also change. I'd like to say that Lyle McDonald's blog is Body Recomposition. That's an excellent source for this information. This subject material is incredibly complex and kind of hard to read. It's not light reading. Lyle McDonald has a good way of presenting it where it doesn't lose any complexity, but it's a little bit easier to read. So that's actually where I got started. Once I wanted to lose weight and kind of understood a little bit of the basics, I went straight there, and I basically read every article he has on his website, and browsed his forum and asked him questions to kind of get a better understanding of human metabolism and nutrition without having to basically go to school for it. But that's a great resource. It's bodyrecomposition.com. So on to the last submitted question. Danny asks, how long is the low-carb diet effective for? I read that people can still plateau on it, and it makes me wonder what should I do when it stops working? If and when that does happen, how should one go about introducing carbs back into their diet? Excuse me. Well, a low-carb diet isn't particularly magic compared to any other solution. It just seems more effective at first for a couple reasons, and that's because, number one, I mentioned this already, but you're getting rid of all the stored carbs in your muscles and all the stored water in your muscles. So it seems like, I've seen people where they lose 15 pounds in 7 days, and that's really just stored energy you had that once you go off of it, you're going to gain that same amount of weight back probably overnight. But people see that as like, wow, I lost weight. So like I said about the positive feedback loop, it seems really effective because you have that positive momentum, and then you're more likely to stick with it because you saw results right away. Even if you didn't lose that much fat, it still helps you to kind of buy into the process. So other than that, because you're eliminating an entire macronutrient and likely an entire section of food, you limit your food choices. So you're forced to really only include more healthful food choices that are going to keep you less hungry, give you more energy, and give your body more nutrients. With low carb, there's really not too much you could eat that is the same as like a bunch of hyper palatable foods that aren't going to fill you up. There's a couple things that would kind of fit into that, and that's going to be like pork rinds or pork skins. I think they're called chicharrones if you get them from like the Latin section of the grocery store. And that's just fried pig skin, essentially. That's probably not the best choice. The protein in it is mostly like skin, so it's not a great choice. That's kind of like a snack food, but for the most part, there's really not like snacky foods like chips and pretzels and that type of stuff that you can have. So you're making whole food choices that are really close to like where they're found in nature. So you have like eggs and avocados, and you don't have a lot of things that are going to cause inflammation if there are certain foods that inflame you. So because of that, you're getting more nutrients from the food you're eating. You have more energy. You're not hungry, and you just feel great overall. But like any other diet, as soon as you plateau, it's no different. There's no different mechanism for plateauing between the two of them. It's really just that when you plateau, you either have to kind of wait it out, and it could be that your body's holding on to more water for whatever reason, because it's important to remind everyone that the scale is often way behind where your body actually is as far as fat loss. So whenever you lose fat, you breathe it out. The fat is like an oil in your cells, and whenever you burn it, you breathe it out, through your mouth. And then those fat cells are empty, and water rushes in and fills them. So what happens is over time, the fat cells know they don't need to be holding onto that water anymore, and then it's called a whoosh. The water just comes right out. And so there may be times when you don't lose any weight for 3-4 weeks, then all of a sudden you drop 10 pounds or 3 pounds overnight, and that's just because your fat cells have collapsed and all the water's come out. So in the case of an actual plateau where you've given it some more time, it really just requires adjusting your intake. And it could be as much as, it could be lowering the calories, bringing the carbs down a little bit more, upping the fat, more protein, things like that, just kind of adjusting things because your body may have settled into a balance and it doesn't want to let go. So you just kind of have to change things up a little bit. As far as reading about what people do for a plateau, you kind of have to be careful there. Anytime you have a diet that's kind of tied to a philosophy or a particular worldview, there are lots of people that are zealots about it, where they think that their way is the only way. And no offense to anyone, but you have like people that are into paleo, you have people that are into low carb, you have people that are into other choices like that, where it's like they think that their way is the only way that someone could do it, and that's really not true. What I mean is that their way is the one way for everyone else too, not just them. Everyone along this journey will find that they have a way that works for them. And that's what matters, is that you could try everything out there under the sun. But what's important is finding a way that works for you. And in structuring everyone's plans, I've tried to make it so that it's a framework for you to figure out what works best for you. That's why I try not to be restrictive about certain foods or recommending you eat this instead of that. It's really just, this is a framework, find what works for you. And once you've found it, stick with it until it works, and recognize when it doesn't work, and then change it to find what else works and keep going. When you kind of stick to these almost religious approaches, that's when you tend to bounce around between this fad diet and this fad diet, because it didn't work, the diet must be broken. It's really just that you haven't found what works for you yet. So it really is good to have like a solid framework that's not too rigid and doesn't require you to buy into this entire philosophy. So just be kind of careful. And the reason I say that is a lot of times people will cherry pick data. So look at a study and use that to support their views when it could be a biased study, or they're excluding data that kind of contradicts that. So just kind of be careful. If you kind of found something you'd want me to take a look at, I can kind of give you my opinion on it. Authority Nutrition, they are really hardcore low carb fanatics, but they do tend to back up their articles with some good science. So I'd say they're pretty fair as far as a good source for that. But to reiterate, I don't think that low carb is the only one way or anything. It's not for everyone. There's no pressure for anyone to try it. I've used it sparingly, off and on, no problem. It's not something I could do long term at all, but it certainly does help to get that positive feedback loop going again, for sure. So as far as incorporating the carbs back in, I would say that you should wait to a point where you are in your training, if you're weight training, where you need those carbs for performance reasons. And at that point, I would say eat low carb the rest of the time, but around your training, before training and after training, that's when you get your carbs in. And you could do the same thing where you kind of add them in slowly. And this starts to resemble a cyclical carb diet, where you eat low fat, high carb on workout days and low carb, high fat on rest days. Now, a lot of other photocracy coaches I know for a fact start everyone with this type of diet, where you get a calorie, protein, fat, and carb goal for workout days, and you get a different set of goals for rest days. I think that personally, I don't agree with that, and I think it's a little too much for someone. most people don't need that level of micromanagement, and it's kind of a burden. I've been there myself, where I did that for a while and I had great results in the gym, and body composition wise, but it wasn't flexible enough for me. As you may know, I love wings, and it just so happens that I was working out on wing nights, and that was a high fat day, and I just felt like I was messing up constantly. So that does work, but I'm not a fan of how inflexible it can be. So then again, if you're just tired of your current low carb diet or whatever, and you want to start incorporating carbs back in, I'd say there's no bad time. It's fine to start. It's not a long-term solution, I don't think. It's used long-term for people that have epilepsy as like a solution to help with that, but there's no need to stay on it for an extended period of time if you've kind of reestablished your positive feedback loop. But again, I'd like to reiterate that if you do that, talk to me first. We'll add things in slowly, and we can kind of start with potatoes or beans or something like that. And I'm going to say it again because it's important. You just have to be prepared, because the scale will kind of swing back up as soon as you reincorporate carbs. And you just have to be aware it's not fat. You're not storing fat. You're just storing carbs in your muscles. And I think it's 1 gram of carb is stored with 3 grams of water. So for every gram of carbs you eat over a certain threshold, you're going to be storing that like 3 times as much water too. So you can put on a lot of weight on the scale quickly, but it's not fat whatsoever. So that wraps up all of the submitted questions so far. So I'm going to kind of skip around and see if anyone asked in the Q&A app and through the groups. Just give me one moment here. All right, I don't see any additional questions asked. Well, that was a lot of talking there. Guess that's why I'm here, huh? All right, well, I want to say thank you, Danny, for all the questions. You don't have to apologize for asking so many, honestly. I'd rather you ask them all the questions you have, because it's pretty likely that someone else was wondering about the same issue or something similar but didn't ask. Even if that weren't the case, I want everyone to feel like they can ask any question and get an honest answer to the best of my knowledge, and trust that if I don't know offhand, I will know the best place to find out and make sure that there's research supporting it that seems like it's a consensus about it, and rather than just be biased information. So please, anyone, if you have questions, please do ask. You shouldn't hesitate to ask. I'll answer any question you like. Probably going to regret saying this, but I'll say it anyways. I'll even field questions that are not related to the course in moderation. So, no one's kind of thrown me for a curveball yet, but I'll try to answer anything you could think of. But on that note, everyone have a great night and enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll talk to everyone soon. Bye-bye.